Live, darling. Okay. Okay. Welcome to Wednesday night here at Safe Harbor. I just keep running into the most interesting things. My across the street neighbor drove by, rolled down his window, and said, "I've been watching you on Facebook. You look so good." And I said, "I use a lot of makeup." So, but he said, "Where are y'all? I want to come. I'm gonna come see you." So. That was just a precious out of the clear blue this, even though I saw that he had loved Sunday's service, so that it wasn't totally surprising to me. But Gary Leach has been very active. He started the PADAP program here in Corpus Christi years ago. We hosted it over at the old church, and I'm not sure if he's still involved with that because it has another name. I can't remember. Somebody mentioned what it was. It's no longer PADAP, but it's called something else. And I don't know if he's still managing that or not. But let's share the needs of our church. And we still are hurting with Bernie's death. And the family, as far as I know, is not planning any kind of memorial service. I had reunion group today with Alan Mosman, and he was so glad that he made it to see Bernie. Bernie was part of our reunion group. And so that was just a very sweet time. And then we told Bernie stories, okay? And some moments where he embarrassed us to death. And he just didn't have a good filter when it came to what things he would say in public. So he was from Iowa, and that Iowa kind of directness was just all over him, and it just was very embarrassing at times, but you always knew where he was. But we know where he is now, and his body's been donated to Baylor Medical, and so there's not going to be any kind of ashes or anything else until they're finished using the cadaver. So don't know what the boys are going to do. I know that I talked with Mike before he flew out Sunday and back to Kansas, or back to Chicago. So we just pray for the Sullivan family and the Bruner family. Mary Jo and Betty Perry, we just thank God that they are doing well. And I know that Mary Jo had another kind of scan or something, but I don't know that we have any report about where she is. I know that the Andersons are headed up, both with Donnie, but also Linda will go through an evaluation about where she is and see what goes on. Billy was with them until yesterday, I think, was when he was headed back to Kentucky. So they've had a delightful time eating out too much, but they really enjoyed having him there. I know they did. And my dear friend Carolyn Scheibel that has had very successful surgery. And my nephew, Michael Storms, is scheduled for a surgical procedure the 21st of July, taking 10 to 12 inches of his colon and a portion of the juncture between small intestines and large intestines. And it's the 3 to 4 hour, and also some lymph nodes, just to make sure, because he's young, but to have stage 2 cancer at this point, it is happening up at the Woodlands Herman Memorial Hospital. So we'll be continuing to praying for Michael and for that come. Yeah, and so and their child. So that's just a very scary thing for somebody that age to be going through. Got a text from Jimmy Nail. You did too, and he's had a setback. Doctors have heard AFib in his heart. He's going to have an echocardiogram a little bit later. That looks like he may have to postpone the replacement of the right knee. They've taken him off of Celebrex, and because it's having some damage to his kidneys. So it's just one thing after the other. So that's just not. He was just looked like he was just zooming ahead, right, headed for the new surgery in August, but that's may have been postponed. So we will just continue to pray for Mike and Patty. Bjork we're praying for Patricia Smith, who is home now but continues to have to recover from her issues that go with that. Michelle O'Keefe too, dealing with some issues for her that's I think a consequence of her MS and some other things. Joyce Berkebaugh, we've been praying for her. Gary keeps me up to date about Owen, and he is still in his regular place, but they are beginning to move towards moving him into assisted living on the next floor up. and he needs to be there, because once you fall, you are not determined to be really sufficient enough to be trusted to be there, because they don't have as much care as he will have on the fourth floor. So when it happens, it's going to happen, right? Bureaucracy takes its time, and just gestates everything well. But we pray for Owen, pray for Gary, what he is happening, what he has to live with. Vicki and Rick, I've got y'all still down, and day by day, and okay. The pain just keeps awake with the pain and everything else, so he's just not sleeping, and yeah, with his diabetic traumas and stuff that way. So thank you. So pray for Rick, and pray for Vicki and her brother and other family members that have been going through a lot. So pray for you too, Vicki. Pray that God will be with you and sustain you. Let's continue to pray for Uvalde in Ukraine, and Highland Park, and oh my gosh, just a crazy world. Gwen.
A lot of families that has COVID, not in the same area.
A lot of families, yes, yeah. The numbers were up over 200 and something. 620? Okay. This is that new variant that is not as deadly, but it is problematic. So, yeah.
Having your shot, your booster and everything may give you a lighter case, but it's
Still doesn't keep you from doing that. So, family, beware when you're out in any crowded area. Go ahead and wear a mask and do that. I'm the world's worst at that. So, good. Went back down, but that's still a lot. Still a lot. Okay, but it's still running 200 or something. So, that's just something that I want you to be very careful about, and remember to take care of yourself. Yeah. Okay. Grady and Tracy Murphy, we pray for them. Grady may have a job offer in San Antonio, but he's just slowly beginning to re-enter the world. I was with Josh today at Reunion Group, and I forgot to ask about his uncle, and who had the open heart surgery and had been induced into a coma to protect him from some stuff that was going on as a result of that, some infection that had to deal with. Any update on Beth?
So we agreed to give consent for them to do a transesophageal echocardiogram so that they can see if there's some MRSA in her heart. She tested positive for MRSA.
Wow.
So they were supposed to do that test before doing the trach.
Okay.
That was supposed to happen today, but now that might get pushed off so that they could do the MRSA test.
Okay.
I haven't had any afternoon.
Beth has MRSA. They're concerned about it being in the heart, so they're going to do a very special heart evaluation, and then she will have, she'll be intubated after all that happens to make sure she is.
They want to get the intubation out.
Oh, they won't take it out, but they're not until they get everything else stabilized. Yeah, where's the MRSA? Yeah, because that can be very damaging.
Because they want to get her off the sedation. They want to get her
right, breathing on her own, and yeah.
own and stuff.
So they can evaluate what interventions, what needs to happen beyond that. Okay, Ben.
And her donor sites are still wet, but they're giving medication that should help dry them out.
Okay.
Because they won't heal unless they're dry.
Right. That's
and
the.
Oxygen is okay, and she's still doing dialysis.
Wow. Okay, oxygen's okay. That's amazing with her her lung condition. Praying for Beth and for Ben and for the sisters and for brothers and family that's taking care of her and all that obtains with that. So we're just really, really concerned. I didn't have my time with Ray today. He texted me that he was really feeling under the weather. Didn't know if maybe he was having a reaction to some new medicines that he's taking. But, I said, Ray, I'm praying for you that I get to see you Sunday. And he responded in his most appropriate way. He says, me too. Fervently, I'm praying that I get there Sunday. So, but he was just feeling, didn't sound like he was really severely, but he felt down. And it dawned on me he may have COVID, so that could be one of the dangerous things. He's had his shots. I don't know about the boosters, but we need to do that. Yes?
In regards to the mask, that happened, or Monday afternoon.
Yeah.
And they ran a statistic across there that I couldn't believe.
Yeah.
I did double check it. How many mass shootings have been in the United States so far
This year, over 300?
Over 309.
That's what I heard. I thought it was 361, but 309.
Yeah.
And
They
we're
said
talking about,
311.
okay.
They consider a mass shooting where 4 or more people
Yes,
have
4 is,
shot
yeah,
or killed, excluding the shooter.
right.
So 309, that's 11 a week.
11 a week going on right now. Yeah, it's just, and we're not a crazier country than England or Switzerland or Canada or anything else, or Australia or just France or whatever. We just have a very different attitude about, when people, young men especially, who are not mentally developed, can handle a weapon that is generally reserved for the battlefield. And so I have very strong feelings that, I remember what it was like being 18, 19, 20, 21, I made stupid decisions. I mean, it was 5 or 6 years ago, Ben. I can remember that far ago. Don't push your luck, okay? But I just wish we would simply say, you don't need that kind of weapon, not at that age, And I have a good friend, a Christian, who we were talking about this at the golf course, and he started saying, "But I got a lot of feral hogs I shoot." Well, I looked at him and says, "If it takes you, AK-15, AK-15, if it takes you an AK-15, you must be a horrible shot. What's wrong with you? Have fun at this thing. Why just use it, just obliterate that?" Yeah, well, he's not going to eat them, so just destroy them a lot. You make fertilizer out of them as you're killing them. So, and of course, the ugly thing from Uvalde that I never realized how deadly that UK is was the doctor who simply said there were kids that were decapitated by that. One shot and their head is gone. That's a lot of gunpowder that just is needed to kill a deer or feral hogs. Make it, have fun with it. I wouldn't do that, but, and I happen to know after one feral hog shoot, there ain't no more feral hogs, so I'm not sure how you could justify eating that. But we're not going to get into Second Amendment rights because I believe in that. My daddy was in the Army and did that sort of thing too. Polly. Yes. Oh, Polly. Son-in-law. Much worse. Wow. Just not doing well. Oh my goodness. Weak and just, oh my gosh. Polly, your son-in-law, we need to add him back to the list. Still, well, you can't fall forward too fast if you're driving, I guess, Polly, as long as his feet are working. So, well, that's true, and can't get up. Yeah, because he doesn't need to do that. His name, Polly? Not on my list.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Polly.
He's such a good man and done so much good in the past with his military.
I know that
and all that.
he's got a son like Wally or something, or...
Yeah, he's got a son in California.
Okay. I'm thinking of another family that's got a funny names with Walter, Wally, and everything else. Ben.
I helped Trina the other day get some medication, picked it up, and bring it to her. But she went to the doctor last week, and they're saying her heart is enlarged, and she needs to focus on that and lose some weight and just de-stress.
Take on de-stress, yeah, how you do that, but that's...
And then Val messaged that she's not feeling great, but watching online. Big hugs to my church family.
Yeah. Val, you'd do anything to get away from being around me, so I'm just going to chalk that up to a wise woman, okay? I'm teasing you. Who wants to wish dear friends to feel bad, on days like this? So our prayers are with you, Val, and hope that you recover very quickly. Ben is hard to handle without a little buffer, okay? So I just need you around here in a very special way. Any other prayer concerns that you would have that you would share with us that you know about? Let me have a word of prayer, and then we will do our Bible study. Oh God, thank you so much for friends like these that are meeting here with me, and those friends and loved ones that we have mentioned by name. family members, acquaintances, sometimes just friends that are our friends because we know their family or their friends. And in that connection, you, in the power of the Holy Spirit, equips us to care at a deeper level than is native to us. Oh God, thank you for the assignment that you've given to us to participate in heaven's intervention in moments of grace. We thank you for the privilege of talking with you, sharing our heartfelt concerns with you, knowing that you were busily at work in each of these circumstances before we showed up. But we get to participate with you. We get to watch what you do. Thank you for listening, and thank you so much for what you will do in each of these circumstances as we deliver them to you with love and affection and confidence and trust. In the name of Christ our Lord, we pray for these. Amen. Thank you so much. I didn't ask for any praises, but I know Joanne is still grinning from ear to ear. We've got Jordan is here with his wife and my grandson, and Judy's got a cauliflower ear because Joe just talks and reminds her of her own daughter at about that age. Just talks and tells stories and even knows things like, you know what the German word for hospital is? And he quoted it and knew it. She said, I didn't believe him. I Googled it after he left, and he was right. He did it on purpose. He was there. We are in Genesis chapter 32, beginning at verse 22. And if you'll remember now, we have been, Gary believes that he will turn 80 before we get through Genesis, and he's probably pretty accurate chronologically, but he won't remember where we've been or how we got there. But just one of those neat things. Jacob's been on his way home. He finally got to Mahanaim, which was a sacred site that becomes very utilized during the later generations of the monarchy and the time when Israel and Jerusalem was a nation's capital and things that were going on that way. But it was an encounter with someone holy, and as scholars observed, when he's leaving home and leaving Israel, headed up to the Yankee land to be with his mama's brother and family, he has an encounter with God right at the threshold of his leaving at Bethel, and sees the ladder and all that kind of stuff, and then heads on up into the territory in which Laban occupies in Haran, and is up there for 20 years trying to figure out how he can afford his wives. Finally, is ready to go home, sneaks out of town when his father-in-law's back's turned, and of course his father-in-law discovers that not only has he left with all of his wealth, but he's also stolen the household gods, which was not only worship, but also the God's possession was a kind of a security deed and title. It was like a guarantor that what you possessed really was yours. And we don't understand how they invested those little carved images with that kind of authority. But whoever possessed those images, it was sort of the clear deed and title that everything else that you owned was yours, because those gods were in your possession. And of course, we have that hilarious story about how Rachel hid those gods underneath her saddle when she claimed to be in her menstrual cycle, and the Jews hearing about that, knowing that in their law, women that had any sign of blood on them was filthy and dirty and untouchable and unclean, and could not be part of the family, and so they listened to this and say, boy, that's a filthy place to hide your gods. Our God would never put up with that, and you're treating me that way. So the story took on some humor. But now he gets to the place, he's back at Mahanaim. He comes to the river Jabbok. It's really more of a creek. It comes in from the east, and it empties into the Jordan River about halfway between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. And just on the north side of that is he crosses the brook Jabbok, and when you do, you're now in Esau territory. You're now in official Abraham and Isaac territory. And so we pick up the story when he's right there. He's got to face Esau. He's terrorized. He can't sleep. He's sweating. And so he gets there, and that's the same night when he's on the north side of the Jabbok. He gets up and he takes his 2 wives, his 2 maids, his 11 children, and he crosses the ford of the Jabbok. And it doesn't make sense because he took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything he had. Verse 23 almost sounds like a different storyline, which is that he didn't cross over with them. He actually sent them over by themselves. Now, a couple of things that we do know from antiquity is that the ideal time to move a herd or to drive cattle and goats and everything else was nighttime. The daytimes were so severe. We were just talking about Pat's son and going out and playing golf. That should be a healing experience, and almost died with heat stroke. Well, animals, particularly the woolly kind, just do not do well in the heat of the day, and so they tended to drive them at dusk through the night and then bed them down when they got to the next morning, and it would protect the animals from that sort of thing. What seems to happen here is that there's some scholars who guess that these were the J and the E source that were sort of providing their own way, but really when you read it in the Septuagint, even the expression, he sent likewise everything that he had, that's not in the Hebrew. That's in the Greek translation of the Hebrew. It's in the Samaritan Pentateuch, which was another truncated, briefer form of the first 5 books of the Bible, and that word, everything he had, is incorporated there. And so in the translation of the Old Testament by contemporary scholars, they borrow that from the Syriac and the Septuagint and from the Samaritan Pentateuch, and go ahead and insert it here. What it seems like that Jacob did is that he basically sort of led the flock and led his family over to the other side, and he kept going back and bringing more of them over until they were all over, and then he goes back and spends the night back on the north side of the Jabbok, on the Haran side instead of the Esau, Isaac, Abraham side of Jerusalem. And Jacob was left alone. This is verse 24. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. That's kind of an unusual thing because, again, was this Esau had snuck into his camp and he wrestled with Esau? Or was this a messenger from the gods? Again, in antiquity, if a creek is flowing in a certain direction, there are beings, heavenly beings, messengers from the gods that is causing it to move that way. They did not appreciate gravity or changes of elevation. Things moved because the gods did it. In fact, at Bethel, 20 years early, when he's headed north, he sees the ladder, or the gateway to heaven, and he sees the angels descending and ascending upon the earth. And what those angels are doing as they come down to earth is that they are coming to carry out an assignment from the from the throne of God, from the council of God, to go and make this volcano erupt, or make the winds move in this direction, or cause the rivers to move in this direction. They had assignments that they came, so that everything, very much like our Indian ancestors that believed in the spirits, and that things happened because the spirits were there. They didn't have modern science. They didn't understand the kinds of things that we are taught now in grade school and junior high and stuff that way. They believed that if something moved, it was alive. Something alive was making it do that. It's the one thing they noticed about a cadaver. It didn't move. Outside of the fact that after 2 or 3 days, the gases of the internal gastro system would expand, and finally it would exhale gas through the orifices of the human body. And it was then that the Jews believed that their spirit finally left them. That final movement of the cadaver was a sign that the spirit of the man had gone from him. And it's why it was important that Jesus get a hold of Lazarus before 3 days. He didn't make it. He was after 3 days. And they told him, you don't get there, he stinks. And Jesus doesn't care. He walks up and says, Lazarus, get out of there. I didn't make this trip down here for nothing. We got some coffee to drink and some fish tales to tell. And sure enough, Lazarus walks out and he said, go and bind him. He's all wrapped in his death clothes and everything else. The same story of Elijah with the widow of Nain, where her son dies, and he goes in and lays on top of him and breathes on him, and he comes alive again. And whenever he didn't work any miracles among the Jews that were being plagued by that famine and stuff like that. So here is Jacob, who is wrestling with, we would surmise, in fact, one of the translations called him a demon. What are those little urchins that live under bridges and the trolls? Okay, kind of like a troll. A spiritual being that had control of the creek and of that boundary, and so he would wrestle with him during the night, because, as you're going to hear when it gets daybreak, you got to turn him loose, because you can't see him in daylight, but you can sure sense him in dark. Anybody ever, as a little child, walked someplace that it was dark and you were by yourself? And every Wednesday night, I remember as a junior high student, my family would leave me at the church, and I would practice singing in the choir, the adult choir. And then the choir director would go slightly out of his way, and he would drop me at the end of the little dirt road that went in front of Uncle Dan's house, my grandmother's house, finally up to our house. It was probably about maybe a 300-yard walk up this dusty lane. And I remember very distinctly walking along in the dark, and I would hear things that I never heard in the daytime. I mean, it may have been nothing more than, I kept telling myself, that's just the wind blowing that bamboo, hedge that we've got there on the south side of the cotton farm. I'd tell myself that, but I walked right down the middle of the road. I didn't walk along the bar ditch. I told myself there may be snakes in there. Never saw a snake one, but you never know when they show up, especially at night. So I know what it's like to be in a Jacob story and in a world where that kind of anxiety of spiritual forces and who knows what you're going to run into, particularly when you can't see them, particularly at night. So he wrestles with this person or this being or whatever it is, and he wrestled with him all night long until the breaking of day. The sun's fixing to come up. And when the man saw that he did not win the wrestling match against Jacob, he supernaturally just touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh. And immediately Jacob's thigh was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Jacob still didn't turn him loose. And the man says, let me go, for day is breaking. But Jacob said, I'm not going to turn you loose unless you bless me. And he said to him, tell me your name. Now remember, in antiquity, to give your name would be something more like giving somebody your password to your computer. It was a very risky, precious bequeathing of information that they believed granted you power over them. That once you own someone's name and you call them by name, they were obligated to respond to you because you were spiritually in authority over them, at least to that point. Because if you knew their name, then you were sort of at a standoff. But to own someone's name was really a very spiritual, strong control over that person. I've told you this story before, but every time I talk about this, I remember my oldest son, 8 years of age, 9 years of age, at the church that I was pastoring, and I was out in the narthex in the foyer, and as the church services is finished, and I've got dozens and dozens of people crowding around me, and I'm visiting with them and everything else. And Jeremy's standing down off to my right side, and he's saying, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. I don't hear him. Finally he says, Billy. Where'd that come from? I recognized my son's voice, but he said, Billy. And I immediately stopped and looked down at him. And I think I picked him up, says, what do you need, son? And he said, I was calling for you, and you just wouldn't answer. That's why I said, Billy, Jeremy, that's okay. I want you to know that you got my attention. I don't know what he was looking for. Probably ready to go home. But anyway, that was one of those ridiculously silly moments that gave me a sense of what it was like to own somebody's name. Jeremy exercised power over me by calling me by name with his voice. Now, candidly, I really much prefer when he still calls me Daddy. I love that. Sometimes Pops, when he's jesting with me. I don't think they ever use the word father. I'm not dignified enough to ever get father out of them, but it's dad or daddy or pops or something that way, and I appreciate that so much. So this spiritual being asked Jacob for his name. And so Jacob says, my name is Jacob. You remember what Jacob means? It defines his character. I'm a cheat. I'm a cheat. Okay? You ask for a blessing? He says, your name will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. And I will tell you, for the life of me, I thought that Israel meant son of God or sons of God or children of God. It means the one who prevails, or God prevails. It really legally, technically, if you were to look at Israel, it means God prevails. God wins. But in the context, it is Jacob who wins. He's the one who prevails. He's the one who stays after the wrestling match. He's the one who hangs on for dear life. And it defines a new character in him. Instead of being a cheat that's got to sneak his way into victory, this forever, and it's really one of the most important stories in the patriarchal tradition, because this is a moment where Jacob is forever changed, made different. He no longer is going to be found cheating his way or conniving his way towards anything. He is going to stand up and he's going to take on the world face to face in honesty, and he's going to prevail. You are a winner would be one of the ways that I would contemporarily translate the word Israel. You're a winner now. You're not a cheat. You didn't come at this illegally. You are going to stand your ground and you're going to win. And you're going to make it happen. Then Jacob asked him, well, tell me your name. But the spiritual being says to him, why do you want to know my name? And before Jacob could answer the question, he receives a blessing from him in whatever form that takes. And so Jacob called the name of the place where he had this wrestling match Peniel, which means the face of God. For he said, I have seen God's face to face, and yet my life is preserved. Again, part of Hebrew tradition was that if you ever saw God face to face, you would instantaneously die. It was not something that you were privileged to do, but Jacob said, I wrestled with God. That wasn't just any old man or any old demon. I got to be in the presence of God. And I held on to him for dear life. And I won. And I got a blessing from him. And this is a place where I know that I have seen God face to face, and my life has succeeded, has persevered. The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel. It's really, Peniel is a little bit more of a pun on the word face of God. Peniel means face of God also, but it doesn't have quite the same strong emphasis that way. He passed Peniel limping because of his thigh. Therefore to this day, the Israelites do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh on the sinew of his hip. This, what we know from Hebrew practice, it was not part of the law of Moses, but it became part of Jewish ritual and behavior They would not eat the sciatic nerve or the vessel that fed that part of the body. They would pull that out and get rid of it as they would burn the offering and eat the rest of the animal. And it was because of what Jacob had experienced. One other interesting feature that I forgot to point out to you when we were reading through that, the word wrestle is a pun, a word that sounds exactly like Jabbok, the creek. Jabbok doesn't mean wrestle, but there is a word to wrestle, Jabbok, that is used. It's the only place in all of the Old Testament where that Hebrew word wrestle is used, and of course it's at the brook Jabbok where it happens, and so it's one of those kinds of unusual ways in which place names and family names and your name to antiquity was very much chosen to reflect your character or something about you that was memorable and wanted to be remembered. In this particular story, there are three etiologies. Etiology is a big fancy theological word that simply means a story that is told to describe why a certain place is called that name. And it's for me one of my favorite childhood books that Mama read to me was the Mother West Wind stories. How Brer Rabbit got his cottontail. All the stories in the Mother West Wind. Most of the time people weren't acquainted with that, but boy, that was something my mama read to me. Huh? Yeah, how a bunch of those. You remember that, darling? Okay. I remember that, and those are etiology stories. Wasn't intended to be taken seriously. In these, it's a bit more historical, perhaps. And the name of the place oftentimes represents, like Bethel. It is the place where Jacob slept and saw the front door of heaven, and the angels coming and descending, and it becomes the house of God or the doorway of God's place. So those names are very important. But in the etiology stories, there is in this stories, as they talked about it, it is that sacred place, Penuel, the face of God, because that's where Jacob believed that he saw God face to face and survived. There is the name change. How did Jacob get the name Israel? Well, it's part of the story of his wrestling and the blessing that was given to him by God. And then, why do the Jews avoid eating the sciatic nerve of an animal that they have butchered and have burnt? Either that or the blood vessel that feeds that part of the body, and it's because of what Jacob went through in that wrestling match. Three very strong etiology kinds of images that were very important to the Jews in their history, in the ways that they lived out their life following God. The other thing that was interesting, that all of the 7 commentaries that I consulted agreed that this story, because it was told over and over and over again, was a story that the Jews saw themselves in. And we Christians see ourselves in. It's a story about a man who's hungering for God and for God's blessing and for God's direction in his life. It's a story of our struggling to hold on, our struggling to believe that life is purposeful and that God has something really important for us, and we're going to have to wrestle with Him and struggle against, being dismissed, and to say, God, pay attention. I want I want my life to count. And it is particularly the story that, in spite of the fact that you may get wounded in that struggle, or you may walk around with a limp. In fact, there was one of the commentaries that observed that you more than likely, by the end of Jacob's life, he had arthritic issues in his joints, and so he was a very strong man, and so he limped, and so it was taken back to something that happened. Just like I got a flat place on the front of my shin, and it's a place that my brother, in anger, threw a baseball bat at me and caught me right on my shin. And so I've got a flat place on my shin that I wear as a badge of honor, because that was the result of my brother, being driven to a fit of rage that I was very gifted at doing. And yet, he's my brother, and we're family. In spite of the fact that Jacob was been a cheat and a conniver, God finds him and turns him into something different and continues to build his dreams on his life, which says something to us Christians to say, you know, God's doing the same thing with us. He's not turning us loose. He's continuing to use all of our foibles and all of our brokenness and all of our failures and weaknesses, and it's okay. I'm going to use you anyway. I'm not done with you. And that's really vital to me as someone who should not be privileged to be in the position and in my job and in my calling. It's the one thing that I felt I wanted to do and that God asked me to do since I was a senior in high school. And I have experienced things in my life that would warrant my not being able to do that. And God has always found an open door. You may walk with a limp, Billy, or you may walk with a flat place on your shin, or you may have some other real difficult things about you, but you're still my child. I want to use you. I want to bless you. I want you to talk about me. There's nothing in my life so broken or such a failure that God doesn't see me as somebody that has struggled and made it through it, and I'm still here and I'm still standing. I have a very dear friend, a fellow minister, and he's counting down the days till he can retire. And I told him, I said, I'm counting down the days until I get fired, because I ain't quitting any other way. So it's just, I love my job. Now you know. Did I give you a secret about how to make sure that things are terminated, Gwen? You're slow picking that up, girl. Anyway, I just cannot believe I get to do this still, and it becomes more enriching and more enjoyable, and it seems like in some ways I get worse at it, but it's still more adventurous than anything I've ever done, and I don't want to stop. I don't know how to stop. This is who I am. To all the golfers that I will see tomorrow afternoon, I'm the preacher.
How about we let you know if we get fired?
Good. That's a good agreement, okay? I feel like, though, that most of you sleep through my sermons, and so you really don't know if you're tired of me or not, because the rest is so blessed and so complete. But anyway, it's one of those evidences that what Jacob experienced after his rascal ways, God still used him. And next week we are going to have him coming face to face with Esau, his great terror, and see what God has done to let that happen. It's going to be a beautiful, beautiful experience. So I get to wait for you next week for us to do that. So I'm going to get rid of you. Yes, this is time. I'm giving. Yes.
Tasha Moon
Yes.
sent me a message, and so her dad's in the hospital.
Okay.
Dad had a serious mental break. He tried to hurt himself while in the hospital.
Wow.
And there's a bunch of other stuff she said, but she's too emotionally and physically exhausted. He went to the hospital yesterday, I believe.
Wow. Okay, Tasha and her dad and the whole family situation.
Dean Moon.
Right.
And she said she'll message me more when she can.
Process it well for her.
But I asked her if I could share this.
She said yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Dean Moon, Tasha's dad. Paula Bearden is also, we've been praying for her too, but Dean Moon is just, let me add that to my list while I can spell. That's a scary thing. Scary thing. And she's also been sharing with us some situations of her son and some bullying that he's been experiencing, some threats even with gun violence and things that way that have come against him. So she's really locked down right now and very much afraid. So we just will pray for that whole situation. Thank you, Ben, for bringing that to my attention. Let's have prayer. Let me share with you and dismiss you into the care of God. God, you know our stories. You know what lays behind every one of these faces and the footprints that we've left behind. And places that we have been that we don't feel good about, and we hope you can't remember them, but God, we know because we get to share the stories of our ancestors that even when you remember our stories, it doesn't change your commitment to us and your love for us, your forgiveness for us, and your desire to continue to move in our circumstances and in our lives to make us a blessing to each other and to this world. So God, I dismiss into your care these, your children. Walk with them from this moment and grant them a sense of dignity that Jacob experienced the night he wrestled with you and got a new name. Grant us the name that you most want us to have as your children, followers of the living Lord, Christians, disciples of the eternal living God. Whatever that name might be, oh God, I dismiss these into your care. In the name of Christ, amen. Blessings on you. Thank you so much for letting me chase rabbits and everything else. You're going to kill it.